What's up, everybody? It's the waitingfornextyear.com podcast, Tuesday morning. I think I even have the right day. I know it's morning. Tuesday morning. I wanted to talk to you because it's been a little while. I didn't get a podcast on Sunday night. I didn't get a podcast on last night. I'm going to talk to Dave Sterling soon. He wanted to talk last night, but I was out at a live show. I went to a really, really crazy club in Cleveland called Now That's Class. They've got a half pipe in their on the floor of their rock club. It's a crazy place. But I saw a really great show. Went by myself. I was absolutely the oldest man in the room, I believe, and I don't care. This one vaulted straight to the top. I'll get to that in my while we're waiting later in the week. I have some brand new bands. It was one of those magical shows where every opener just killed it. And I think I have got two new favorite bands in addition to the one that I already loved, going to see. So, little sneak peek. Island Slang was one band. Roswell Kid with a Z, Rozwell Kid. Just absolutely crushed it. And then the Hotelier was just as good as I ever wanted them to be. But this is a sports podcast. We're talking about sports. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about this week is Brian Hoyer winning the job over Ryan Mallett down in Houston. Obviously, Brian Hoyer's not a Browns story anymore, but we're still following him. He's a Cleveland kid, and he was here, and a lot of people wanted him to be re-signed. I was one of the ones who wanted the Browns to give him a big-time extension in the middle of last season. So you can make fun of me if you want. You could do whatever you want. And I'm not saying that because he won the job in Houston that proves me right. I think that Brian Hoyer, to a large extent, is exactly who he is, and he's never going to be much better than that. I just think that it's interesting. One thing that we do know about guys who injure their ACLs is that a year removed, they get back on the field 6 to 8 months after the injury, but they don't really start being the same person that they were until a year later. And so the Texans are probably getting a better version of Brian Hoyer than the Browns had even a year ago. And obviously Brian Hoyer, it goes beyond the physical. A lot of people think that he was a bit of a red ass. Probably a lot of people think at this point he was a bad teammate. He was divisive in the locker room. He was a kind of a mid-level or low-level starter, mid-level NFL quarterback, low-level NFL starter who thought that he could be a top 10 guy or who aspired to be a top 10 guy. And we love those kinds of stories when they work out. And we love those kinds of stories when guys achieve that on behalf of our team. When Tony Romo becomes a frontline NFL starter, and whether you like Tony Romo or not, he is a frontline NFL starter. Kurt Warner, it's a great story. I don't think Brian Hoyer's got that in him. And so even though I wanted the Browns to re-sign him and re-up him, I can't really argue that the Browns would be better off with Brian Hoyer instead of Josh McCown. I actually think Brian Hoyer is better than Josh McCown, and so it would stand to reason that it would make sense that I would want the Browns to have Brian Hoyer instead of Josh McCown, but I actually don't really kind of feel that way, and that's odd. But Brian Hoyer, let's at best, he's got an extra couple years that Josh McCown doesn't have just because of their age difference, and maybe he's 15 or 20% better, maybe, and even that remains to be seen. If that 15 to 20% isn't worth it for the Browns. I mean, if you think that Brian Hoyer's ceiling is somewhere in the late 20s in the entire NFL, like he's the 25th or 26th, the best he could ever do is maybe be the 22nd or 23rd best quarterback in the NFL. If that's what you think, then you don't really want to waste a lot of time and effort trying to deal with a guy who maxes out in the 20s but thinks he could be the 6th or 7th. And I think that maybe the Browns, specifically Ray Farmer, grew tired of the delusion there was too much water under the bridge, and so they just moved on. But that's an old story at this point. But Brian Hoyer wins the job down in Houston, and all this does come back to Johnny Manziel. I think we're finding that maybe I was a little bit too overhyped for Johnny Manziel and the things that he could bring to the table, based on his college tape, ignoring too many of the off the field and personal issues when the draft rolled around last year. And then, but I think we're finally starting to see the player that he was expected to be, or that we thought he could be, based on a reasonable work ethic, a lack of distraction off the field. I mean, this idea that everybody, well, Joe Namath, so everybody can party off the field and be effective on it. It was a little bit crazy. You know, it's one thing for a running back or a wide receiver, any of those skill positions, corner, pretty much any position in the league other than offensive line, middle linebacker, maybe strong safety. You know, these are the guys who are putting other guys in the right places, and that's the most encouraging thing. It's not the scramble and the 21-yard TD throw. I mean, those are great. It's not the rolling to his left and throwing the ball 30-some yards for a completion. It's the lack of procedural penalties. It's the fact that Johnny hasn't tried to hand off right when the running back was going left. I mean, these are things that happened in that Cincinnati game a year ago, and that was regular season after Johnny was sitting around watching the offense develop over the course of weeks with Brian Hoyer. This was the Browns were 7-4. I can't remember what the record was when Johnny stepped in, but you know, he'd seen more than 10 games. He'd been involved in game planning more than 10 games in that quarterback room with that team, and he couldn't keep everybody in the right places. He didn't know the playbook. And so that's the most encouraging thing for me so far in the preseason with Johnny Manziel and the Browns is that all the little signs that he's been in the playbook and he understands the playbook are there. You know, we're not seeing those procedural penalties, and we're not seeing, you know, him go the wrong way compared to the rest of his team or anything else. You know, he's making those sight adjustments, and his offensive coordinator is saying that he's making those adjustments and he's making those strides. And so, I mean, we're talking about a guy I was worried about a couple of weeks ago that he wasn't going to be capable backup, and now he totally proved me wrong there. Totally came up and proved that he can be the best backup available for the team. Now, obviously, he's also dealing with a sore elbow, and the Browns outwardly are saying that they're not concerned, and they keep giving him rest every time it crops up. But you can't tell me that that's not some kind of a concern. I mean, a guy who develops elbow pain, they're calling it a use injury. And I don't know. I think that's a bit of a warning sign. You certainly don't. You'd be nervous if it was a pitcher. You know, we've obviously heard that Braxton Miller down at Ohio State is having some trouble coming back from a shoulder, and that prompted a position switch, or at least was part of the reason that prompted a position switch. We're talking about a guy who was a Heisman candidate as a quarterback, couldn't come back from the shoulder in such a way that it sounded from all the back channels like he was having trouble getting back to throwing. And so here we've got Johnny Manziel now coming into his second year as a second string quarterback, having use issues with his elbow. That's a bad sign for a guy who's got to be able to just fire off a ball at a second's notice. A guy with all kinds of weird arm angles. And Johnny does have weird arm angles. He kind of throws from anywhere. And he's very good at it. It's very effective. But if he if it results in sore elbows, and I don't know. Anyway, I guess you have to trust the team if they say they're not worried, but I don't know. I'm not part of the team, so I guess I could be a little bit worried if I feel like it. The only other thing I wanted to talk about this morning is the TV show Ballers with The Rock. I don't know if you guys have been watching this show. I absolutely love it. I think it's great. I like The Rock. I even loved San Andreas before it was popular to love San Andreas. No, everybody loves The Rock. But this show, it's right up my alley. A guy who has left the sport of football, retired, but now he wants to get into financial management, and it gives you that kind of inside look at what NFL players might be like. And it's really a great show, and it's a great season 1. But I have this feeling that over the course of time, we're going to look back on Ballers and say, well, that show kind of sucked, because it's the kind of thing where it's really great for one season and it's really fun for one season, but then it gets into the entourage thing where it becomes about Ari and Lloyd, and it becomes a parody of itself, a cartoon of itself. And I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen with Ballers too. Where are we going to go? We completed season 1 with Vernon, and they got him his deal, and there's a celebration at the end. It was a nice, neat package. So does that mean they're going to have an athlete every season? One player who is like their project every year? How long does the show go? At what point? The Rock and his guy stay with the big firm. That was the big thing. Are they going to stay or are they going to go? And that's like in a TV show, that's Ross and Rachel. Are they going to date or are they not? But at some point they're going to have to leave. And once they leave, is that a whole season? Does that carry a whole season of activity? There are a litany of TV shows that would have been better as one-off seasons. And unfortunately, as much as I love Ballers, and I do love the show, I'm concerned that it's going to be another one of these TV shows that should have been one season. The characters are interesting, the storyline is interesting, but you tell the main arc of the story in the first year, and then all that's left to do is writers leave the show, and it becomes self-referential in such a way that the writers want to pay homage to they want to be true to the previous thing. And so it just becomes self-referential, and it doesn't really work anymore. I'm thinking of all the TV shows that would have been better off as one season. On Showtime, there was Masters of Sex, which was the show about sex studies. It was really good for a season, but they, once you play up the angle of these two and whether they're going to get together and the, whether they're going to get funding and the research and all this stuff. All right, well, the shock value wore off, and we've explored the characters. Maybe we've got 2, maybe 3 seasons, and that's it. And they should just leave it at that. But they can't. The first season is so successful that they deal with a dwindling audience every year thereafter. Same with Weeds. I've frequently talked about that show and how great it was for the first season, maybe 2, maybe into the 3rd season. I don't really remember all the different arcs at this point, but I just remember sitting there looking at my wife at one point and just saying, yeah, this thing is over. It's just over. Speaking of Weeds, the creator of Weeds did Orange is the New Black, which I'm sure some of you watch. I have not watched the latest season. Loved season 1. Midway through season 2, I was kind of like, not sure where this is going. Not sure I'm really enjoying this anymore. I'm sure there are others. That's your feedback. That's your feedback project this time. I want you to tell me a show that you just loved out of the gate, but kind of died midway through season 1 or into season 2 or 3, where you were just like, all right, enough of this show. It just needs to end. I love it, but it just needs to go. There's another one for me. I'll try not to steal them all because I've given them a bunch of them, but the 4400. which was a sci-fi show on USA before, this was like the beginning of cool TV shows showing up on odd networks. And so the USA Network had the 4400, which was this really great show about people who disappeared. I think it was people who disappeared through history, and then they all showed up one day. And so it was a mystery show, kind of like Lost, but predating Lost, where you're trying to figure out what's going on. And it was really cool up until like the second or third season. And it's another one. It should have been a miniseries. Just should have been a great miniseries. They should have wrapped it up. But these creators get greedy. They want a long running 5, 6, 7 season show. I mean, that's probably what happened with Heroes too. Anyway, I'm stealing them all. So tell me, that's your feedback on Twitter, on the WFNY podcast Facebook page. I want you to tell me the shows that you had to give up after 1 year because they sucked. They tried to keep it going, and they just milked a cow that was barren. All right, that was kind of graphic. That's it for now. I'll talk to you online. I'll have more this week. I promise to try and get a guest this week. I tried to get one last week, but we'll get to it. It'll be fun. Talk to you next time. It's been the waitingfornextyear.com podcast.
Waiting for next year.